Hey there, welcome to our AP Legal Zone podcast, brought to you by AP Lawyers. We are your top fix for all weekly law updates, including family, immigration, wills, and estates law. Just a friendly reminder, we are not your lawyers, and everything contained in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and not to be construed as legal advice. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can stay connected with any updates and get notified about our new episodes.
Hello, I'm Angela Princewell.
And I'm Shireen Abdi. Welcome.
And today we will be talking to you about the date of separation.
Yes, and we're going back to the basics. So in this episode, yes, we understand we're on episode 3, but we've kind of had a consideration that, maybe we should go back to the fundamentals. So we're the next couple of episodes that we'll be having kind of more of a discussion on back to the basics. But for today, we'll be talking about the date of separation.
Yeah, so the date of separation is very important because it's the start of everything, right? It sounds counterintuitive that we're having this conversation because of course you're separated. That's why you're or someone that's about to be separated. That's why you're listening to this podcast. And but it's really not as straightforward as you would think, right?
Of course, and a lot of people don't understand the importance of the date of separation.
Exactly.
So for us, people don't even really put their mind to a specific date, I would say, and then would just want to deal with the issues. But to us, the date means a lot.
I had an interesting call today, actually, and the client thought the date of separation would be the day they actually signed the agreement. I mean, it seems, it's for me, I've actually heard this a few times. They're like, yeah, we'll just make the date of separation the day we sign the separation agreement. And at first I used to think this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but then it kind of makes sense,
you're not
right?
aware, right? Of
the
importance of it, and you don't have the luxury of maybe dealing with lawyers.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the more common misconception that I have when people come and meet with me are that they have to be physically separated.
Yeah.
To be separated.
Yep.
And that's like, no, okay, when we were living in the home, I moved out, July 19th. So that's the date that is the date of separation. And sometimes it is, but for all intents and purposes, if you're still living in the home, you can still be separated. You can still be separated, but living separate and apart.
In the home, yeah. Do you know the argument that I hate having the most is date of set. One person says it's February 1st and another person says it's February 4th.
I mean, that's not so bad.
No, I find it very bad because we're dealing with how do I deal with this? Because there's a lot of, and we're going to talk about why this is important and why those 3 days could be critically important. But I mean, my first instinct is what the heck? This is just 3 days, right? If you're arguing over years or even 3 months.
That I find more challenging because that makes a significant impact.
Yeah. But we'll talk about, remember the 3 days, and we'll talk about why maybe those 3 days could be critical. But let's say, you're having that conversation and you're trying to figure out what the date of separation is. And this is not just for clients. You would not believe the number of times that I've gotten letters from lawyers where they're asking my client, so someone goes to their lawyer to say, well, we're separating and they retain a lawyer, and that lawyer writes to someone who comes now to retain me. So naturally they bring the letter and they're like, well, this is what this lawyer is asking and we want to get a divorce and blah, blah, blah. And this lawyer is painstakingly put in the required documentation and all of that stuff. But then they don't say the date of separation.
Which is very vital for completing those documents.
It's surprising to me. So at that point, of course, then we start to try to figure out what the date of separation is. If we're lucky enough, there's
guys agree.
And there's that one pivotal moment. There was that huge fight. And after that, we're like, we're not doing this anymore or something like that. But hey, we dream, right? How many times does that happen? So if you're unfortunate enough to, and a lot of times people would compromise, you can honestly even pick a date if you're not too sure. There's nothing that stops you from just picking a date and saying, we think it was around February. So we'll just make it February 1st.
Great.
Yeah.
It makes everything a lot easier.
But do they always?
No, I've actually had this issue twice this week. alone. So it's very important. I think people were surprised by why it's so important. And
Yes.
we'll talk about that, of course.
Yeah. So if you're in that argument over what the date of separation is, these are the factors that we kind of go over with our clients, and this is basically from the case law. And one of them, the most obvious one and the nice and clean one, is there's a physical separation. Yay, we got into an argument. He moved out yesterday,
or
and
he's sleeping on the couch. Physical separation doesn't mean they need to move
that's
out
a good
from the
point.
property. You know, it's that we're no, you know, if they're sleeping in the guest bedroom or and they're not sleeping in the same bed, that's very indicative of separation.
Now, obviously, if you're unfortunate enough, as we often are, you're dealing with a situation where maybe they've been sleeping in separate bedrooms, but just because, you know, maybe there's a new baby that's always crying, or the other party snores.
The mattress and has back problems.
Yes. So then physical separation doesn't help us. So then we talk about maybe absence of sexual relations. And Shireen and I are just going to be running through a few factors. Yeah. None of them are in and of themselves, determinative. It's just a host of factors, right? So lack of sexual relations is one thing. You know, if you're sleeping in separate bedrooms, but you're still intimate, then you're really not separated. Or you could be, and you could say, well,
we have that one-off night.
Yes.
I can tell you how many times I've seen that.
Yeah.
But yeah, if for all intents and purposes, you've considered to be separated from that person, even emotionally, so sexually as well, but that can be indicative of a separation.
Absolutely. So another factor is, communication.
Yeah. So communication between you and your partner. So for example, if you and your partner actually don't even communicate anymore, and there's no calls, there's no messages, that might be indicative of a separation, that you guys just are living in the same property or not living in the same property and you just don't communicate.
Yeah, you guys don't talk. Like a lot of people don't talk to each other because it makes sense. It's appropriate in a lot of cases.
And we're not talking like 3 days of not talking after that fight, but you know, just more in a, I wouldn't say a more permanent sense.
Some people start to text, maybe, and you, as you said, if it's
you have
just
kids, of course, it's very. If you start talking just in relation to the children, then that might also be helpful in determining your date of separation.
Another factor that, back in the day when activities for kids used to be a thing, I mean, this is April 2021. So if you've lived through these times, you know what we're talking about. But
congratulations.
So when children's activities, like if you used to go as a family to watch that kid play, baseball or hockey,
or go on family vacation, celebrate Christmas together, celebrate those holidays together. A lot of time, people would tell me, we're separated, but because of the children, we're going to spend Christmas together. We don't want things to change for them. And that usually happens when the parties are still amicable. And that's something that a lot of people, where we have challenges now, where there's pictures and family memories that are being created and the other party's misconstruing that as not being separated.
Exactly. So I've even had a situation. So if it's easier if we have a scenario where they're no longer going for these activities together. So one person takes the child to baseball this week and another person a different week. So in that case, it's easy and straightforward.
Yeah, and where one party is vacationing with the children alone and vice versa.
Exactly. I've actually had a situation where the parties were also attending counseling together, and one party is saying, well, we weren't separated, and the other person was like, no, we were attending counseling, so you can understand that we're separated, right? So you could see how that would be challenging, but anyway, it's the nature of the beast. So there's also separation of household responsibilities. That's also a factor.
Yep.
And yeah, so if you guys are cooking separately, you're doing your laundry separately, again,
make them do their own laundry. I don't blame you.
Again, compared to what you were doing before, right? So if you always did your laundry separately because you would, that's just your preference, then obviously you can't rely on that. So that's why, again, we'll take all of these factors together and decide and kind of come to a common sense date of separation, so to speak. So attending family events, that sort of thing.
And like social activities. So if your friends have birthday parties or, you're not really attending as a couple, then that's indicative. If you're attending social functions, like even parent-teacher interviews or things like that, anything that's on a social nature and you're no longer presenting yourselves as a couple or a partnership in that sense, that would be indicative of separation.
So as you can see, I guess in short, you could do all of these and still be separated, but depending on how the absence of this might indicate you're separated. So it is complicated, like everything family law, and everything would obviously depend on your own family situation, right? So for some people, you can get away with saying, well, we did this just because of the children, and for others, it's like, no, we never did. So it's always been our pattern. Like if one person is arguing we're separated and that's why we no longer go to hockey together, it could be, well, we never did go to hockey together, so that's not indicative of anything.
Yeah. And then oftentimes, like, the biggest issue I find is, let's say you both equally have some sort of you meet some of those factors, and then you don't meet others, so each of you have a good case. To be honest, it's up to a judge to decide if you're in litigation, and they're going to use the best evidence that's put before them and making that decision and using these host of factors.
Exactly. So now that we've talked about how impossible it may be to determine your date of separation, and I'm just kidding, like more often than not, parties can agree to the date of separation. It's difficult when they can, but a lot of times parties can. So why is it so important? Why would people litigate the date of separation so bad? I would actually give you a situation on a matter that we're working on. And we're looking at a 10-year difference in dates of separation, right? And it seems mind-boggling, but in this case, because it's 10 years, it's so critically important that we figure out which date. And so let's jump into why that's important. So the first reason is that for those that are married, the date of separation is your valuation date. Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to run through how the Family Law Act defines the valuation date. So the valuation date means the earliest of the following dates. 1, the date the spouses separate and there is no reasonable prospect that they will resume cohabitation. 2, the date a divorce is granted. 3, the date the marriage is declared a nullity. 4, the date one of the spouses commences an application based on subsection 5 sub 3, which talks about improvident depletion of property. And the date before one of the spouses dies, leaving the other as the surviving spouse. So the one that's most often applicable is the date the spouses separate with no reasonable prospect that they would resume cohabitation. So you see that long sentence is relevant because you could separate and there's a reasonable prospect that you could come back. You could reconcile. And that's why if you're going to counseling thinking that there's an attempt at reconciliation while somebody else is thinking something else, then you could see how that could become a problem, right? So the valuation, what's even the valuation date the valuation date is the date of separation for married people. But what's valuation? So valuation has to do with equalization and equalizing your net family properties. If you're not married, equalization does not apply to you.
Not automatically, yeah. No.
Yeah, so you would divide your properties. You may or may not divide your properties if you're common law, but it's not an automatic entitlement. So in the case of the 10-year date of separation difference, everything else, there's a lot of issues involved in that case. There's spousal support, there's parenting issues and all of that involved. But the date of separation, we had to put everything else on pause to have a trial on the date of separation issue, because how do we divide these people's properties, right? For most people, what they have today is not the same as they had, 10 years ago.
I mean, and that's ultimately one of the reasons why it's so important that we have a date evaluation or really a date of separation, so that we can determine the valuation date that we'll be using to equalize your net family property.
Yeah. And remember that difference with the 3 days that I spoke about?
It can make a big difference.
It can. So remember that for equalization purposes, you're only entitled to what the other side, to a division or an equalization of your net family properties up until the date of separation, the valuation date. So, if I win the lottery on February 1st, then and the date of separation is February 3rd, you could see how annoying that would be, right? So
you must have the most lucky and unlucky
yes,
fortune there.
Exactly. So that 3 days could be, it could be critical because somebody may have, drawn huge sum of money out of your joint account. So sometimes the easy way for lawyers or for anybody might be to say, well, it's just 3 days, it doesn't matter. But sometimes we want to look at the numbers.
Yeah, because sometimes people have, maybe a spouse or a partner's actually gone ahead and understood why the date of separation is correct, and maybe withdrew $40,000 from a savings account that you didn't know existed, or you did know existed but you didn't realize the value was so low.
Exactly.
And that's $40,000 less that gets calculated in equalization.
Yes. So that's why the date of separation is important, because that's the valuation date. It's and if it wasn't clear enough from the word itself, it's the date that we value all your assets and liabilities.
Yep.
So if you separated on February 1st and the other person had $100,000 in their account on December 31st or $0, it really doesn't matter, except obviously there's something funny going on and we can claw that back in. But if all things are equal, none of that matters. Everything that matters is what happens on the date of separation.
Yeah. Often, I think that's also a common misconception. We'll be talking about assets that people had 3 years prior to the date of separation. I'm like, but it doesn't really apply here.
The saddest one is when people are thinking of the current values, right?
Oh, and that's unfortunate. Yeah.
Yes, because they're thinking, well, we had this, like we're married and we're not divorced yet. Like how, if he has an RSP and now it's grown by so much, why don't I get?
Or the value of a property, the increase from the date of separation to today's date to the time that you're actually, I guess, settling the issues. Unfortunately, the today's value is not what you're getting unless you're joint on that property.
I had the same conversation today as well. And I'm like, well, it's not a matrimonial home. It's even if it's a matrimonial home, it's still the date of valuation that matters. The relevant question there is, are you entitled to any of these properties? And unfortunately, my client wasn't entitled to these properties. So unfortunately, yes, we've waited. Yes, the real estate markets have gone up, but you requested that we wait until it goes up. It's and it's sad. I feel her pain, right? Because she's watched it go up, but we can't. I mean, there's ways we can get around this. Don't get us wrong. Like if property values have increased, we can make trust claims. That's our job. We can figure it out. But for the most part, especially in this scenario where you requested the delay and now the value of the property has gone up and you are not entitled to that property, I actually had the exact
opposite conversation with someone today. And the matrimonial home was solely owned by that person. And I was like, well, from the date of separation is the date that the value she's going to split with, or it's really going to be included in the equalization process. So it's not like she's going to get an equal division at the time that you sell the home if you have to sell it. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. And the other reason why the date of separation is important is for divorce purposes. And for lawyers, especially at our firm, I know that the divorce just seems like an administrative process to us. Like we're so focused on the real issues. We're concerned about the welfare of your children. We're concerned about how you're going to be fine financially. And I know that sometimes the closure that comes with divorce is such an afterthought for us. And that's because we know that after a year, you could get it. Like it's really not that big a deal.
That's a common misconception. I think people come to us and they're like, I just want a divorce. And I'm like, there's so many other corollary issues, which would be the support, which would be the division of assets that comes before a divorce.
And that's where the argument lies with those corollary issues, because with the divorce, if you can show that you've lived for
separate for a year, and that's also, unless you're bringing a claim, you could also bring a claim for adultery, divorce claim for adultery, or
Cruelty, yeah.
So those you can actually, they're a lot harder to kind of meet. But most people actually just apply for a divorce based on the fact that they've been separated for a year with no prospect of reconciliation.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, who are separated now think that they're eligible to get a divorce.
Yeah.
And the common thing I have to say is, well, if you look at it from the court's perspective, there are so many circumstances which people actually do get back together.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of, keeps a protection for parties who, separate so suddenly and then apply immediately for a divorce, and then they reconcile. That's a lot of administration. a lot of difficulties in correcting something like that.
Absolutely. So I've come to understand that the divorce has emotional significance. Even though from a legal perspective, I mean, it is significant, obviously, for a lot of other issues.
Especially if you want to get remarried.
Yeah, so there's that, even the benefits, some benefits and things like that, your divorce would affect it one way or the other. But so that's, you have to wait the 1 year if you just want to do it the quick and easy way. I always tell my clients, if you're upset at your partner for whatever reason, especially if you feel that they're at fault for the separation, if they've messed things up in the past, like, do you want to give them a chance to put you through the whole trouble and the mess of proving their cruelty? Like, it's not, by the time we're done negotiating some of these issues, we might be almost close to the year, and you could just do it in a quick, inexpensive way.
Yeah, emotionally I understand it. Like, especially. But another common misconception is if you can get a divorce, just if the other party doesn't agree. If there's other issues that need to be resolved, you're most likely not going to get that divorce.
Yes, that's true. Because the divorce affects other substantive rights, which, we will talk about in other episodes.
In our other episodes, for sure.
So the last reason why, that we would share with you today for the significance of that date of separation is the support obligations, right? Don't we just love retroactive calculations? Just going back, taking that calculator and just calculating who owes who what from how many years. Yeah,
it's
fun times.
And it's not just even retroactive child or spousal support. It also goes to any post-separation adjustments that need to be made.
Absolutely.
So if someone is paying your share of the mortgage after the date of separation, and it's a jointly held property as well, then they're going to be reimbursed. Obviously, if there's some support obligations, that would be credited against them, but that's also a situation. So if they're paying for those household expenses, you're required to pay your share.
Yeah.
From that date.
Remember that $40,000 you talked about? Someone withdrawing. So if we do find that the date of separation was how many years ago? And so if the date of separation was December 31st and someone's drawn, $40,000 today, my clients would call in a panic, like, he drew this money from the account, and I'm like, don't worry. The date of separation is the date of separation. Whatever he or she does subsequent to that, we will be able to fix it.
Yep. For example, I think the most common one is incurring debt on a joint line of credit or a joint credit card after the date of separation.
Yes, I know. That bothers people.
Don't worry. We'll get that back. All of it would be credited or reimbursed to you. If they have support obligations, it'd be credited back. But ultimately, it's not forgotten, is what I'm going to say.
Yeah. So the first thing the takeaways, just to wrap up for today, the takeaways would be, the date of separation is critically important. Just put your mind to it before you give us a call. And if you can't really figure out when it is, don't worry about it. We will go through your specific situation and help you figure out what the date of separation is based on years of case law and what the factors that the judges look at in determining date of separation. And, also understand that it's very important because your division of property, your support obligations, and your divorce all flow out of this very important yet simple date.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks everyone. And we hope to have another podcast out to you soon on another very fundamental topic. So stay tuned.
Thanks for listening and joining us in the AP Legal Zone. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find more episodes by searching AP Legal Zone on anywhere you watch podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast today so you can stay connected with any updates and get notified about any new episodes.